Standardized tests have been used since the early 1970s and are administered and scored in a consistent manner. They are administered to students generally beginning in 3rd grade and continuing every year until 11th grade. Each year, students are tested on different subjects, including math, reading, science, and writing. Standardized tests have proven to place an incredible amount of pressure on both students and teachers to perform well or face the consequences. The pressure of these tests can be overwhelming and cause student stress levels to increase dramatically. Oftentimes, in the higher grade levels, the stress and pressure caused by these tests are enough to make students give up and drop out of school completely. Teachers also tend to worry about their students' performances on the tests and will oftentimes teach to the test instead of engaging their learners and allowing important information to be learned well. When teachers begin teaching to their students in this way, the information learned is limited, and the students do not receive the quality education that they need and deserve. Some advocates of standardized testing will argue that testing is necessary to prepare students for college entry-level exams. However, testing in the classroom varies drastically from entry-level exams in that the subject matter is much more general and they are not timed. If you still believe that standardized testing does not affect you personally, then maybe the outrageous amounts of money being spent on these tests will grab your attention. According to Barbara Miner from RethinkingSchools.org, states are likely to spend $1.9 billion to $5.3 billion on standardized testing. Standardized testing, or high-stakes testing, began as a reform movement in the late 1970s. This movement began when schools were in need of more rigorous learning requirements for their students. The first tests used were called minimum competency tests and were different than tests used previously. Kreitzer was quoted in an article by Janice Schimmel and Philip Langer describing these tests as being of local origin and administered at both the elementary and secondary school levels. They are mandated by either state or local government agencies and are used to make decisions about students and/or institutions. Beginning in the 1980s, minimum competency tests began to be used to specify graduation requirements for high school students, as well as a means to prove the need for remediation. When these tests began to have higher stakes, many students began to be overwhelmed. In this same article, according to Catterall, students see the test as a real threat and, along with grades, probably a major contributing factor to dropping out. When creating and preparing students for these tests, it was found that it is extremely difficult to find the appropriate criterion levels and the difficulty for these tests. What information should be tested? What should the level of difficulty be?
Texas Educational Assessment of Minimum Skills, also known as TEAMS, was the second standardized test for students in Texas. TEAMS replaced TABS in the 1985 to 1986 school year. While TABS only measured students' basic skills, the new test TEAMS would measure students' minimum skills. TEAMS measured these minimum basic skills in the subject areas of math, reading, and writing, and it tested students in grades 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11.
The TEAMS test was replaced by the TAS test in 1990 and was used until 2002. TAS was to implement much harder content in mathematics, reading, and writing, as well as tests in science and social studies for the first time, but only in the 8th grade. Testing was conducted from the 3rd through the 8th grade, and the exit level test would be administered in the 10th grade. School curriculum underwent a complete overhaul with the implementation of the TAS test. Many of the brightest and best prepared teachers with the richest curriculums were required to scale back in order to teach to the sequence and format of the TAS. This greatly reduced the quantity and quality of the subjects being tested by the TAS. But not all teachers decided to scale back. Mrs. Moreno, a Spanish teacher at a virtually all-Mexican high school in Houston, found a way to teach to the TAS while engaging her students from a multicultural perspective. She would teach them in what her students referred to as the Mexican way, using a lot of Spanish so everyone could understand, and with a lot of cariño or affection. This yielded Mrs. Moreno with great success in reducing test anxiety in her students. Science, social studies, art, and other elective courses were greatly impacted by this new curriculum. In many schools, science teachers were asked to suspend the teaching of science for weeks in order to drill and practice for the math section of the TAS. Art teachers reported that they were required to drill on the grammar section of the TAS at the expense of their art projects. An ROTC instructor was assigned a 5-paragraph essay each week, not linked to ROTC, but to add to the regimen. Schools became factories pumping out testing machines rather than places where students were engaged, inspired, and motivated to learn. Research on children's learning shows that learning is not linear, that it must build on what children already know and understand. that it must engage children's active thinking, and that it must engage many senses. The most devastating effect of the TAS was that students were no longer motivated after passing their exit level TAS in the 10th grade. And although they had already passed the TAS, they were still required to complete additional math and English courses in order to graduate. Many students did not take these classes seriously because they thought it wasn't important since they had already passed the exit level TAS. This led to failure, which for many led to dropping out.
The TAKS test, or the Texas Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, began in 2003. It was created after No Child Left Behind because the Texas Education Agency wanted a test that covered more basic skills. Many people praised the test at first, but criticism didn't take long to accumulate. Teachers were teaching the test and not the actual course. Students in upper level classes were being tested over curriculum they had learned over a year ago. Some teachers didn't even have to worry about a TAKS test in their course because the test subjects vary by grade level. Many parents feel that the test put too much stress on their kids. One alarming trend shows that students who fail the TAKS test typically do not do better the second time around. Another pattern shows that small schools located in rural communities do better than schools located in urban communities on exit level TAKS tests, mainly because large schools have more students from low socioeconomic statuses.
With standardized testing being the #1 indicator of knowledge these days, it is obvious that the pressure put on students is incredible, and instead of lowering the importance of these standardized tests and putting indicators in other areas, the school board continues to attempt to make tests that work perfectly as an indication of knowledge, a feat I don't believe is possible. Just this past year, we've seen a transition from the TAKS test to the new STAR test. The STAR test is believed to include more relevant materials of students' current grade level studies rather than focusing on material that students have learned previously, a problem for those in AP classes. This is constructive in that it structures learning around primary concepts. However, just as any other standardized test, the STAR test still doesn't promote good teaching methods and instead still relies on teachers using drill and kill methods in order to get specific knowledge of how to test rather than what to know. This method may not be seen at first due to the fact that teachers will be new to this test and won't understand quite how to teach to the test yet. But once the test is settled in, the teachers will know exactly how to teach their kids to be good on the test. This teaching to the test method, which focuses on good testing skills, will cut into instruction time that could be used to give the students useful knowledge. Not only does it seem that the STAR will still prove to push teach to the test methods, but it is unlikely that the STAR will provide an unbiased testing experience, both culturally and by gender. Unfortunately, standardized testing has slipped through the cracks of such civil rights acts and the Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972, which, to quote from Sadker and Zitelman, states, "No person in the U.S. shall, on the basis of sex, be subjected to discrimination under any educational program." Many people don't realize that studies have shown that white males have an advantage in standardized testing. As the era of the new standardized test begins, there is no doubt that advocates of standardized testing will attempt to make an affirmation that standardized testing is effective. I sincerely hope that in the future we can find an alternative to standardized testing that will not only aid the way students learn, but also provide an unbiased method of testing. After this project, we gained a lot of insight into the cons of standardized testing.
We understand that it needs to be reformed in order to improve quality of teaching.
To help improve our struggling economy, standardized testing must cut costs.
For the sake of our future learners, standardized testing needs to make a more fair and accurate assessment of knowledge.
We stand against standardized testing and hope that you see the merit in our positions.
As you can see, standardized testing produces many problems that can't be ignored by those in the field of education. As pressure continually increases with stricter college admissions and less job opportunities, society will have to find another way of testing which will not cause physical effects on both students and teachers. Along with these effects comes the economical impact that standardized testing brings with it. With the billions of dollars being spent on this outdated form of testing paired with a struggling economy, it's absolute that we should be looking at a more cost-effective way of testing, perhaps using an online source which will not only cut costs but usher in a more technologically advanced testing method that will cater more to the students of the future. As we move forward, society must push for a new means of testing that will vanish the many current problems that standardized testing brings with it. And until then, we must do our best to make standardized testing as cheap, unbiased, and as accurate of an assessment of knowledge and skills as possible.